Hey everybody, I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about a word we use a lot in the church, and that word is trust. And that's a word that's often kind of used synonymously with faith, and while they are very similar, I think trust is slightly different. And what got me thinking about this was reading and studying the story of Joseph. For those of you who aren't familiar with the story, Joseph is the youngest of 12, and he's sold into slavery by his brothers. And later he comes to power in Egypt as kind of the right-hand man of the Pharaoh. And his brothers come back to Egypt looking for food during a famine. And it's then that he reveals that he's their brother. And at that moment, they're scared. These brothers are scared to death because they're sure that he's going to seek revenge for what they've done. But he says to them, "What you intended for evil, God intended for good." In other words, he said, it's not you who sold me into slavery, it's God. Because God wanted me to prepare this place, to prepare a place where the remnant of Israel could survive during the famine. That's a trust that I think most of us maybe don't even have an opportunity to test. That level of putting our trust and faith in God and in God's plans. Trust is an interesting thing. Because if I were to go to most of you and say, do you believe that God is real? That there's a God who created all things? Probably say yes. And if, by the way, if you say no to any of these questions along the way, then come and talk to me because we need to talk about this. So yes, I believe that God created all things, including us. Okay. Second, do you believe that God is all-knowing? That God knows us better than we know ourselves? Yeah, I believe that. Third question, do you believe that God is loving and kind and has your best interest at heart? Many of you would say, yes, I believe that. So, you believe that there's a God who created all things, who knows all things, who knows us better than we know ourselves, and that same God is loving and has our best interest at heart. And yet, we struggle to trust and to put our faith in that same God. So one of two things are possible here. Either maybe we don't fully believe those first three statements, or we're crazy, But seriously, when you think about it, if you believe those things about God, of what we profess to believe about God, then why wouldn't we want to put our faith and trust in that God? Why wouldn't that come naturally and easily to us? And the answer to that, I think we find in Genesis, in the garden. It's sin, right? This sin that draws us away from each other and puts a barrier between us and God. It's sin that makes it so difficult for us to trust. You see, I believe that in that moment when sin entered into our lives, the truth of who God is and how God sees us was ripped out of our souls. And in its place were put a number of things, the first of which I've talked about many times is fear. But the second of which is mistrust. This inability to trust. And you see it in our everyday lives, right? We see kids who don't really fully believe that their parents love them. Certainly my kids have moments where you can see it in their eyes that they're certain that I do not have their best interests at heart, that my one goal for that day is to ruin their lives. And yet I love them more than anything in the world. Would do anything for them. We are born into this broken world with a natural mistrust. And that's one of those lies that God wants to come into our hearts and rip it out and to say, let me take this lie that Satan has placed in your life away from you and replace it with truth. Replace it with the truth of who I am and who you are. Let's replace this fear, this guilt, this shame, all of these things, this mistrust, with love and understanding. This is all ultimately a choice that each of us has to make. Are we going to believe the lies? Are we going to believe that nothing is really trustworthy? Are we going to believe that we worship a God who is trustworthy? A God who does love us and know us. A God who understands and has our best interests at heart. Trust on the surface is a very simple thing. It's what do you choose to believe in, and not only believe in, but act on? Are you going to live your life as though you trust in the God who created you? Or are you going to live your life rejecting that? Are you going to live your life trying to find other things to trust, to believe in? You're going to trust in money, in wealth, in power, in worldly possessions, and whatever the case might be. Because I guarantee you're putting your trust and faith in something. We all are. But God wants us to trust in Him. Him alone. Period. So who do you trust? What do you believe is the truth about your life and about the God that you worship?